So my name is Elizabeth Kreitz. I'm a postdoc at the University of Edinburgh.
And I'm Chelsea Komlo. I'm at the University of Waterloo, and I'm also a principal researcher at the Zcash Foundation. And today we'll be giving you research updates on Frost. So you might not know what Frost is, and that's totally okay. So what Frost is it's a flexible, round-optimized Schnorr threshold signature scheme. And Frost was designed by myself and my collaborator Ian Goldberg in 2020. And Frost is actually two things. So first, Frost introduces a distributed key generation protocol, which later we've come to know as PEDPOP. And second, Frost introduced a two-round threshold signing protocol that is concurrently secure. And this is kind of what Frost is known for, because it was really the first in its kind. So threshold signatures before Frost were either three-round, or they were insecure when signing sessions were performed concurrently. So this is sort of the first of its kind in the literature. And what's really interesting to this community is that Frost was actually designed with the Zcash ecosystem in mind. So we actually had people come and sort of gather requirements from the Zcash community and presented those requirements to us, and that's where Frost emerged from. But now it's being adopted as an industry standard. So really we sort of designed something for this ecosystem, but it turned out to be a problem that needed to be solved writ large. So I've been talking kind of a lot, assuming you know what threshold signatures are, but you actually might not. So let's see what those are very quickly. So a threshold signature scheme is a public-private scheme. So like any public-private scheme, there's a public key that's used for verification. But unlike single-party signatures, the signing key is actually partitioned among some set of signers. And here I'm showing you a 2 out of 3 example. And what that means is you actually only need some subset of signers to participate in order to issue a signature. And that's nice because say one of the signers takes off on their motorbike into the mountains, you can still have some set of signers be able to issue a signature. And what's interesting about this is that signers sign using only their secret share. So the full secret is actually never reconstructed. You might say like, oh, okay, this is like really interesting magical cryptography. Where would we actually need threshold signatures? And there's actually a lot of places where you might want them. So first and foremost, banks and exchanges are very interested in threshold signatures. Also, cryptocurrency wallets are also interested, so you might want to take your signing key and partition it among many devices. And then finally, for trust authorities, you might want to partition trust among many authorities as opposed to a single authority. So I presented Frost at Zcon last year. So this is kind of a recurring topic and something we've been working on at the foundation for quite a while. So last year when I presented Frost, we had published the paper. I'll refer to that original variant of Frost as Frost 1 going forward. And I had also presented Frost to NIST. So NIST was having a workshop on standardizing threshold signatures, and I had presented Frost there and gotten good feedback. And finally, we had started an IETF draft on Frost because there was so much interest outside of the Zcash ecosystem that we decided to write it up in sort of a generalized way. So now let's look at where Frost is today at this Zcon. So I checked on GitHub, and there's at least 5 public implementations of Frost. There's probably more private implementations, but there's not just our implementation. Other people have implemented it as well. We have an optimized Frost 2 that Liz will be talking about in a little bit. We have additional security proofs. So what's nice about this is we wrote a security proof, but there's now independent security proofs validating our results of the security of Frost. Our IETF draft is almost done, so we're starting to request feedback, and we're hoping to wrap this up quite soon. There are other protocols that are starting to build on Frost as a building block. So I'll talk about this in a bit, but this is sort of one example of some research that's taking Frost as a building block and incorporating it into higher level protocols. What's interesting is actually PEDPOP is being used in the context of other threshold signatures. So I know that PEDPOP is being used in the context of threshold BLS, for example. Currently at the Foundation, we're working on unlinkable Frost. And I'll talk about this later, but we're sort of taking Frost and now incorporating it for the privacy guarantees that the Zcash protocol provides. And then finally, sort of the gold standard for cryptography is that Frost is being used practically. So Coinbase published a blog post where they talked about their use of Frost, and I've talked to many other practitioners who are actually deploying Frost today. So that's, I think, kind of the most important validation we can have. And I'll pass it off to Liz.
So I'd like to take this opportunity now to discuss some of the details about how we uncovered a more efficient version of Frost called Frost 2 and how we proved its security. And in addition to Frost, we also proved the security of a range of multi-party Schnorr schemes. So we proved some multi-signatures in which all N parties are required to sign the message, and also some threshold signatures like Frost 2 where some threshold is required. This is joint work with Chelsea and Mary Maller. So before we get into multi-party Schnorr, I just want to recap how regular single-party Schnorr works. So Alice here is going to sign a message. And the first thing that she does is generate her key. So she samples her secret key uniformly at random from a field. And her public key is a generator raised to this secret key. Now, in order to sign a message M, she's going to sample a nonce. So she samples this little R value uniformly at random from the field, and again, raises that value using the generator. So the nonce I'll refer to as this capital R. She then forms a hash value of including the following. So it includes her public key, the message that she's signing, and her nonce. And the output is this value C. She forms part of the signature, Z, using the little value R plus this hash value times her secret key. The full signature consists of her nonce R and the little value Z. The verifier can check the signature as follows. So first, it computes the hash value, taking as input the key, the message, and the nonce, and checks this verification equation. You can tell that this basically looks exactly like the equation for Z if you took some generator G and raised it to that value. The verifier then outputs accept if this equation holds. So now let's make an attempt to build a multi-party Schnorr signature scheme. I'm going to have a few simplifications here. So in particular, I'm only going to consider 3 signing parties. And all 3 of them are going to be required to sign. So this is the multi-signature setting. I'm also going to include a combiner, and this is just for simplicity. So this combiner is not trusted. It just makes things a little bit cleaner. So the attempt would be, how about everybody just generates a regular standard single-party Schnorr? Okay, so they form their nonce as before. So each party has this value R, and they send it to the combiner. Now the combiner can take the public keys and multiply them together to form the aggregate public key representing the 3 parties. We are going to include proofs of possession throughout this talk, so everybody is going to prove knowledge of their secret key, and that's how you can just multiply the keys together without any kind of rogue key attack. The combiner also creates an aggregate nonce, which is just the multiplication of each party's individual nonce. Then the combiner computes this hash of the aggregate key, the message to be signed, and the aggregate nonce. Sends this value to all of the parties, and then they compute their kind of standard single-party Schnorr, just as before. They send these values Z to the combiner, and the combiner just adds them up. So the final signature consists of the aggregate nonce and the aggregate value Z. And critically, this verifies exactly like single-party Schnorr. So you take as input the aggregate key and the aggregate nonce, and it looks exactly like standard single-party Schnorr. This is important, too, because in the threshold setting, you won't be able to tell which signers actually signed the message. So that's really important for privacy. Also here, with the simplification for multi-signatures, for a threshold scheme, you would have a key which is output by the distributed key generation protocol and also some Lagrange coefficients thrown in, but This is kind of the simplest thing for us to analyze. The problem is that this is completely broken. So there's been a long line of work, starting with the original paper by Schnorr, who proposed this ROS problem. So ROS stands for random inhomogeneities in an overdetermined system of linear equations. Never mind that. You can basically think of this attack as kind of like a birthday attack or a solution to a k-sum problem. So the problem was stated in the original Schnorr paper. In 2019, Drivers et al. Actually show how to break the unforgeability of the scheme that I just showed you, along with a range of other multi-signatures, threshold signatures, and blind signatures. This has a confirmed polynomial time attack, which was discovered by Ben-Hamoud et al. In 2020. Now, critically, this attack relies on the concurrent setting. So what I mean by that is that an adversary could potentially open many signing sessions at once. So prior schemes sometimes limited the notion of security to sequential security in order to not be susceptible to this attack. So basically, every signing session would be open and completely closed before moving to the next one. But we're interested in having a system which is secure in this concurrent setting. So the trick kind of works like this. The adversary opens multiple signing sessions, and they see the nonces of the honest parties first. So you'll recall in the last slide, everybody sends their nonces right away, right? So the adversary can basically wait, see what everybody else's nonces are, and then produce theirs in a clever way. So then they're able to use this to forge a signature. So one way to fix this is to add a round. So this is a commitment round. So the parties will actually compute a commitment to their nonce first, which is just the hash of their nonce value. They send these commitments to the combiner. The combiner sends these commitments back. Again, I'm using a combiner, but we could have some kind of broadcast where everybody's just sending these values to one another. Then at that point, they reveal their nonce. So critically, an adversary has already had to commit to their nonce, so they can't do this like clever trick of using the other nonces they've seen. So here again, the combiner computes the aggregate public key and aggregate nonce, multiplying everything together, and sends the value C to each of the parties, and then they compute it just like regular Schnorr. And the verification is exactly the same. So this is actually one of the contributions that we made in this work, was to consider a 3-round multi-signature simple musig, which includes proofs of possession of the keys, and also a 3-round threshold signature simple tsig, which incorporates the PEDPROP distributed key generation protocol that was part of Frost. But the main observation that was made in the work that produced Frost was that you don't need 3 rounds. You can get 2 rounds, but you have to do something clever. I'm calling it Frost in quotations because I am considering the multi-signature setting here, not threshold. But the idea is the same. So instead of sending a single nonce, you send 2 nonces. And each nonce is computed exactly as before, g to the r and g to the s for some random values. Now they send these nonces directly to the combiner, and the combiner multiplies the keys as usual. But there's also this additional hash value a. So the hash takes as input the index of the signer, the aggregate public key, the message, and the set of all the parties' nonces. So this is another way to kind of commit to those nonce values because they're all being hashed. So again, you can't kind of manipulate your nonce value after the fact. So now the aggregate nonce is computed as the product of the r values times the s values raised to this signer-specific hash. And the reason that you need 2 nonces is if you had just 1 raised to this hash, you could just basically multiply it out. So this nonlinearity is really critical. From here, the combiner computes the hash value C as usual, sends it to the parties, and then they compute their z values as follows. So you notice the little r and little s times this a value. Then they send their value z, and everything is like before. The observation that we made for our optimization is that the hash value doesn't need to be computed individually per signer. So you can actually use a single hash value. So here, I've highlighted it in red. The hash value takes as input the aggregate key, the message, and the set of nonces again to prevent those ROS attacks, but it doesn't need to take as input the signer index. So what that means is that there's just a single hash value. So this reduces the number of exponentiations required for signing from t in a threshold case to just 1. So this is the second set of contributions we make in this work, is we introduce an optimized 2-round multi-sig called Speedy Musig, which incorporates the proofs of possession, and also the optimized version of Frost called Frost2, which we prove secure together with the PEDPOC distributed key generation protocol. Now, the reason that we were able to uncover this optimization was actually a function of the way we were trying to prove the original Frost scheme. So this is a new proving framework that we're introducing here in this work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we were able to prove Frost2 secure. So basically, these proofs are made difficult by the fact that they're complex interactions involving multiple parties. And then there's also the aspect of trying to extract some kind of solution to some hard problem. So basically, for our security reduction, we consider kind of the 2 moving parts. The first one being that you have to simulate honest users to the adversary, but you also have to extract a solution from the adversary's responses to some hard problem. So our idea was actually to separate these 2 parts and to consider the multi-party aspects separate from the extraction. So this is a high-level overview of how our framework looks. So we have our 3-round multi-party signatures on the left, which are simple T-sig and simple Musig, and then the 2-round Frost2 and Speedy Musig on the right. So these are multi-party schemes. We consider an intermediate level of assumptions, which helps to separate these 2 components. So the Schnorr assumption just says regular Schnorr signatures are unforgeable. We know this to be true under the discrete logarithm assumption. There are many versions of that proof. But critically, that's a single-party level, so we can actually prove multi-party as a reduction to single-party, and then use the kind of standard proof from single-party Schnorr to discrete log. Now, for the case of the 2-round schemes, we have a similar kind of single-party intermediate assumption called the bi-Schnorr assumption. It's a little bit more complex, but the same idea holds. So you have the multi-party schemes reducing to the single party, and then from the single party, you're trying to extract the solution to the 1 more discrete logarithm assumption. So this is a slightly stronger assumption. So in particular, the 3-round schemes are interesting from a theoretical standpoint because they only rely on discrete log, whereas the 2-round schemes require this slightly stronger assumption. And now I'll hand it back to Chelsea.
So, so we did a bunch of work looking at the security of Frost, but also other people have done similar work and come to similar conclusions, which is incredibly great. In science, we like to have results validated by independent groups. So I'm going to highlight some recent research that came out this year, and it's actually going to be presented at Crypto in a couple weeks along with our work. And so at Crypto, this is actually a merge with the work that Liz just talked about, but I'm going to summarize what their work is now. So this is a paper called Stronger Security for Non-Interactive Threshold Schemes by Mihir Bellare, Stefano Tesaro, and Chenzi Zhu. And what's neat about this work is they actually give a hierarchy of notions of unforgeability for threshold signatures. So prior to this paper, there was kind of a standard notion of unforgeability where you assume that adversary controls, depending on the protocol, T-1 players, and then there's some number of, or the adversary controls T-1 corrupted players, and there's some number of honest players. And what this paper does is it actually takes that notion and makes that as the base notion, and then it creates stronger notions of security. And what's cool is they actually give proofs of unforgeability for Frost 1 and Frost 2, but they actually show that Frost 1 and Frost 2 fulfill even stronger notions of security than what our proofs showed. So that's sort of like the first great news that came out of this paper. But something that's also very interesting is they show that Frost 2 actually has a slightly lower notion of security than Frost 1. So both are actually stronger than what was originally claimed, but there is a slight difference between the 2. And I'm going to talk about what the slight difference is now. But basically, like in short, the difference between the 2 is that Frost 2 is malleable with respect to the signing set, whereas Frost 1 is not. So what do I mean by this malleability of the signing set? So as I said before, you have some number of honest parties, in this case 2, And then you have some number of corrupted parties, also in this case too. Let's assume we're talking about a 2 out of 4 scheme. So in Frost 2, what will happen is all of the players will publish their commitments. And let's say here they believe that they're starting their signing protocol with signers 1, 2, and 3. So the honest players are saying, okay, we're gonna sign with players 1, 2, and 3. And what the corrupt player will actually do is it will choose its commitments with respect to the commitments of the honest players. So critically, it's able to negate the commitments of some of the players. And what this evaluates to is a group commitment that is only with respect to the commitments of one of the honest players. So in short, they choose their commitments so they can knock out player 2, and then the group commitment evaluates to only the commitment of the first honest player. Why is this? You might say, like, okay, sure, like how does this actually impact security? Well, the honest players can't actually detect that this attack is happening, so they'll receive the challenge, they'll perform signing as before, they'll publish their signature shares, and then the group signature is actually with respect to players 1, 3, and 4. So if you're going to take away anything from this slide, I know there's a lot of math and like symbols and whatever, but the most important points from this slide are that players 1 and 2 who are honest think that they're contributing to signing, but the signature represents contributions from players 1, 3, and 4. So this is what I mean by malleability of signers in Frost 2. You might say, like, does this matter? Like, this is actually a new notion for threshold signatures. So in the pre-threshold signatures before, no one actually considered this notion. So it's a new notion, and it's interesting to think about. And you might say, like, is this actually needed in practice? We talked about this as well, and the conclusion that we came to was that we don't actually know. This might be an application-specific requirement. So the IETF draft that we've been working on, we had changed to the optimization of Frost 2, but now we changed it back to Frost 1 because we didn't want to exclude any kind of use case that applications might have. So I guess we came to the conclusion that maybe it is, maybe it's not, but like we don't want to exclude any kind of use case. But for applications that are very secure, that are performance critical and don't really care that much about this malleability of signers, Frost 2 may still be of interest. So I want to highlight this here because there is kind of this performance versus malleability trade-off between Frost 1 and Frost 2. And it depends on your application, which one might actually be best for you. I'm going to switch gears now and talk about robustness. So robustness means a lot of things in cryptography. So I know that there's other notions of robustness in cryptography. But what I'm talking about here is robustness for threshold signatures, or MPC in general, means that the protocol succeeds as long as at least some number of players participate honestly. So here we're talking about a threshold number of players. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because Frost is not robust. So when we designed Frost, we explicitly said, okay, we're going to optimize for 2 rounds for a non-robust protocol. And that's an explicit trade-off that we made. So kind of looking at this example to the right, let's say you have a 2 out of 3 scheme where you have 2 signers required and 3 total. If you have 3 signers contribute to the signature, but 1 signer contributes garbage, you have to throw away that signature. It won't validate. So it's a correctness issue, actually. So if you have this case, you have to rerun the protocol. Now, what's nice is Frost does fulfill the notion of identifiable abort. And what identifiable abort means is that if someone does contribute garbage, you can identify the player that did, and then you can kick them out. So it's not so bad. You can say, like, okay, someone, either maliciously or not maliciously contributed garbage. Let's exclude them, figure out what happened. We can still hopefully sign using the remaining number of players. But there's some kind of like performance trade-off with that. The reason why I'm talking about all of this is because there's some other recent work that's called ROST. And basically what ROST is it's a wrapper protocol for Schnorr threshold signatures, but they use Frost as the canonical example. So basically, at a high level, what ROST is it's a wrapper protocol that makes schemes like Frost robust. And I know this is, I know I've talked to people who would like this type of mechanism, and so I'm highlighting it because I know in practice that this is something people would like to use. So basically, in short, you can have 3 players, one of them might contribute garbage, and you can still have a signature output at the end. And the reason why this is interesting research is because there is kind of a trivial solution of where you would need to maintain n choose t concurrent sessions, but this protocol actually reduces that number to n minus t plus 1. So if n and t are small, it's actually quite cheap to run this protocol. So finally, I want to highlight some ongoing research that we're doing right now. So in the Zcash protocol, there is the requirement for unlinkability of signatures and public keys. And this is currently being fulfilled by Red DSA. So basically, for a re-randomizable DSA, you are able to re-randomize signatures and public keys so that on the blockchain, you're not able to link them between signers. This is very easy to do in a single party setting, and it's harder to do in a threshold setting for different privacy and security trade-offs. So this is, like I said, it's ongoing research. We have a candidate scheme, which I think is going to be talked about later in the engineering update. I'm looking at the proof of security right now, so we'll have some more news towards the end of the year. But this is kind of what's coming up and something we feel confident about being able to design for the Zcash protocol. So, but also importantly, as we've been doing this work, there's been a lot of discussion about what kinds of security or privacy cases we should consider. So do we need to consider signers being able to disclose information so that these signatures can be targeted on the blockchain? How much do you trust signers? How much do you trust the coordinator? So there's a lot of questions, and we would love to hear from you the kinds of use cases you would like to target within the setting for a threshold setting specifically. So I want to conclude by saying we've done a lot of work the last 2 years. A lot's been going on. We've been really busy. It's been kind of a blur. And I hope you can just kind of see how much has come out of this and really how this research that we've done within the Zcash community has benefited sort of the larger ecosystem. So that's something we're really proud of, and we're proud that the research we've done has kind of further implications from ourselves. We're wrapping up a lot of this work right now. We're hoping to have the unlinkability work done soon. The security of Frost is now kind of closed. It's well understood. We're wrapping up the IETF work. So now we're starting to look at what's next. And so Frost started within this community by saying, here's the problems we have. Please help us. Let's try and find a solution to them. So I want to put out a call to you to say, are there other things that we haven't considered? Have you tried using Frost in some settings and found that it doesn't maybe fit exactly with where you're trying to use it for different privacy or security use cases? If that's the case, come and talk to us. We also do other work besides just multi-signatures. So we're interested in other research problems you might have. So yeah, we're looking for things to do or things to work on and new problems. So please come and talk to us about your problems and what you'd like to see from the ecosystem overall. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've got time for just 2 quick questions. The first one is, what other ecosystems are deploying or interested in Frost?
Oh, goodness. I can speak to that. So I know there is implementation of Frost specifically for Bitcoin. So I think there's been sort of interest in writing a BIP for Frost. I think someone from Monero has popped up and talked about using Frost in that setting. I guess that's kind of just the blockchain settings, but there's like other wallets who have also yeah, I guess like it's kind of considered in any setting where you might need an efficient threshold scheme.
And how does Frost compare technically with Musig? How does Frost compare technically with Musig?
So there was the original, oh, I don't know if my, yeah. So there was the original Musig scheme, which was actually the one that I went over in my first slide, so that was broken, and then it was followed up by the Musig 2 scheme. So our speedy Musig is exactly Musig 2 with proofs of possession.